Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast for the Wolves' win over the Warriors on Sunday. Lots to get to in this one, including an impressive late bench performance, some strong Anthony Edwards work in the face of constant double and even triple teams, and also the Wolves in transition. Did they score enough on the fast break against the Golden State team they should have been able to beat in transition? It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend, and this is the postgame pod from the Wolves' win over the Warriors on Sunday as the Wolves move to a commanding 3-0 season series lead over Golden State. Not that like a tiebreaker is going to matter between those two, but anyway, it's still a nice win for Minnesota. Full strength Golden State team. They trailed early, trailed often, trailed for much of the game until late in the second half and a really early fourth quarter. So a lot to talk to here, or a lot to talk about, I should say, from the early game struggles to the late game performances, Ant's performance, tons of things to get to. So let's go ahead and jump into it. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. And a reminder about the postcast too. Of course, we go live after every single Wolves game. You can check out the Locked On Wolves postcast. The audio is actually right here on the audio feed. If you're listening on whatever platform, the episode before this is the postcast from last night. And it was actually just me. Usually it's not me. Usually it's Luke Inman hosting and either Jack Borman or Tyler Metcalf from Canis Supis as the guest on the show. I'll occasionally host, but usually it's Luke and somebody else. I hosted on Sunday, so you'll find me with my live rapid reaction following the game. It's about half as long as this show usually is, so it's not all the same stuff twice. In this case, it usually never is. It's usually different voices on the postcast, so be sure to tune into that, again, on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube, and then you can also listen to the audio here on Locked On Wolves. All right, lots to get to. Let's start here. This game for the Wolves was impressive because of, yes, the opponent, and not because the Warriors are some crazy world beaters this year, but because they're a really good offensive team. And the Wolves, of course, still don't have Karl-Anthony Towns. So, and they trailed for much of the game. And the Wolves offense was in shambles early in this game. They had 18 points in the first quarter. They turned it over 9 times. They had half as many turnovers as points in the first quarter of this game. And yet they still only trailed by 9 because the defense was solid. And they had some pretty good fortune, too. They also made a bunch of threes early in this game. It was the only thing that really kept them in it was the three-point shooting early. At halftime, the Wolves trailed by 8. And they played much better in the third quarter, but they were still down 3 going to the fourth. And that's when things really started to turn for Minnesota. And it happened with both Naz and Ant on the bench. And that's significant for several reasons. One, as I like to remind or I've talked about frequently on the show, with no Karl-Anthony Towns, those are the only two guys that are going to generate their own offense or that you're going to run plays for anything outside of just a spot-up jumper, right? Like you might run a play. The Wolves do run sets where Conley can pop open in the corner or pop open on the wing and shoot a 3, right? They do that. You do it with Monte Morris, right? You can do Alexander-Walker. You're not going to run a play for anyone else where they're coming off a dribble handoff, trying to get downhill and head to the rim. But Naz and Ant, you're doing that for, right? You want them with the ball in their hands in the middle of the floor, similar to Karl-Anthony Towns. Naz can provide a reasonable facsimile of Towns in a lot of ways, and that's how they use him offensively. And he was on a cat-like heater in the first quarter, right? He was 5 for his first 5 from outside the arc, Naz was. he carried the Wolves in the first quarter. Ant carried the Wolves in the second quarter. He had, I think, 12 in the quarter. Had only 2 points in the first quarter. Didn't make a field goal until the second quarter of this game. Ant didn't. And he was great in the second quarter. So the whole offense in the first half was Nas, and then it was Ant. So with the Wolves down 3 to start the fourth, I was a little bit surprised. I wasn't surprised to see Ant on the bench because that's his usual rest, right, is the early fourth quarter. But to also not see Nas on the floor, and Chris Finch trots out a lineup that I believe was Alexander-Walker, Conley, I think McLaughlin to start the quarter, although he didn't play much in the fourth, Kyle Anderson, and Rudy Gobert. And, where's that offense going to come from? Well, it came from ball movement. The Timberwolves moved the basketball extremely well in the fourth quarter of this game. And they turned a 3-point deficit into, by the time Ant came back in the game at the 6:28 mark of the fourth quarter, 6:28, is that right? Yeah, 6:28 mark. It was a 5-point advantage for Minnesota. And they had led by as many as 8 just moments earlier before a Clay 3-pointer that led to a Wolves timeout. So they turned a 3-point deficit into a 5-point lead without Nas or Ant on the floor. And it was a credit to the ball movement. It was a credit to the defense. Timberwolves' first possession of the quarter, Nickeil Alexander-Walker makes a 3. They come down. Monte Morris gets a steal. Then he comes down and hits a 3. And immediately the Wolves went from down 3 to up 3 in 47 seconds in the fourth quarter. A couple additional strong defensive possessions. They trade buckets for a little while. Then Conley makes a couple of baskets for the Wolves. He hits a 2. A couple minutes later, he hits a 3. Then he assists on a Gobert shot inside. And that's when the Wolves were up 8. Monte Morris, I want to shout him out especially. Defensively, he had a couple of very strong possessions against Chris Paul. He was in his hip pocket, moving his feet. We know he's a above average defender, but we didn't see it right away. Remember, he only played in a handful of games with Detroit this year because of the quadriceps injury. So he was still, I'm not saying he was out of shape, but playing into game shape, game conditioning, etc. And then of course he had an issue. I forget what it was, hamstring maybe. With the Wolves a couple of weeks ago, missed like 3 games or a week ago. And like, he looked like Monte Morris of Denver years in late in this game. Defensively, moving his feet well, confident offensively, really strong Monte Morris performance that could be unheralded here. Only played 17 minutes off the bench. The box score is not going to pop out at you, but I thought he was a big part of that run for Minnesota. So both Monte and Alexander-Walker really good, combined to be 5 of 9 from outside the arc in this game. That was a big part of the Wolves taking that 8-point lead that then was 5 points when Ant came into the game. And that, to me, like, that's the stretch of the game I wanted to highlight to start that popped out at me was that early fourth quarter. And then the close, it wasn't really pretty, but I said on the live postcast on Sunday, other than the Ant shot with 22 seconds left where he forced a pull-up 3 with the hand in his face, up 3 at the time. Yeah, that's a dagger if you make it. But if it's not, if you don't make it, sure enough, it's Steph Curry getting a long rebound, coming back the other way, and hitting a layup to cut the Wolves lead to just 1 with 12 seconds left. It was an ill-advised shot from Ant. Besides that, the late game execution for Minnesota was pretty good in this game against a really good a team that's very good in close late situations. And obviously much of that team and obviously the coaching staff has plenty of experience in close late games, big games, etc. And I thought the Wolves closed fine. Other than that possession, they did a good job. And then after that, they they had missed a bunch of free throws kind of leading into that sequence. There was also the Ant technical foul. There was signs of things becoming a little bit unraveled, but the Wolves made the free throws down the stretch when they mattered. Ant went 3 or 4 at the line late to put the game away. A couple more things I want to talk about. I want to hone in on the first quarter and some of the Wolves' offensive issues, what happened there. I want to talk about a couple other things from the box score that stuck out to me before I get to individual studs and duds. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on that 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is also brought to us by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? Do you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? I know I do. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, let's talk first quarter, what happened there, and then I want to get into a couple of other things that I think went okay for Minnesota. Early in this game, I mean, I said this on the postcast, it's like the Wolves kind of went back in time to some of what they did last year offensively without Karl-Anthony Towns, and when Rudy had kind of a rough, really the most of the year, but especially start to his time in Minnesota. And the Wolves just seemingly were trying to force the issue with Rudy Gobert. Like, hey, let's get him the ball. Let's show him he can be involved, et cetera, et cetera. And it didn't work, right? Forcing the ball to Rudy is not a winning proposition. Yes, his points per possession look good in terms of post touches for him, but that's not optimal offense, is not Rudy Gobert in the post, right? And the Wolves weren't only trying to post him up, but they were a little bit. Like, he was trying to get a steal, and Golden State's a small team. So I understand it in theory. You know, like, let's dominate them in the paint, right? We have size. They're playing besides Draymond, it's Kuminga, and that's kind of it. I mean, you have Trace Jackson Davis off the bench, but really all your size is Kuminga. And Draymond isn't obviously a traditional big, right? So it makes sense in theory. But it's Rudy Gobert. It's not Karl-Anthony Towns who you're trying to pummel them with inside. And the Wolves, for whatever reason, were a little bit off passing the ball as well, which is what led effectively to those 9 turnovers. Now, Nas had 6 of the turnovers in this game. He had 6 of the Wolves overall, what was 15 turnovers. But again, 9 of the 15 were in the first quarter. Rudy had 4 himself, trying to do a little bit too much. Conley had 2 in the game. Ant only had 2 for as much as the ball was in his hands. But the Wolves were just trying to do too much. By the way, all 15 of the Wolves turnovers were the starting lineup, and 10 of them were Gobert and Nas together. So, well, Nas and Gobert also combined for 37 points and 24 rebounds, 3 blocks. They turned it over collectively, or combined, the 2 of them, I guess collectively is also correct, 10 times. So a little bit too much, but trying to do too much offensively in terms of getting the ball in Rudy's hands was a problem. And there just wasn't any flow. It was very disjointed. Like, let's get the ball to Rudy. We have to get the ball to Rudy. No matter what, let's get the ball to Rudy. And then you had Nas dribbling the ball off his foot, and you had Jaden trying to do too much with the ball in his hands. Like, there was no flow. And Golden State, to their credit, did an awesome job in Anthony Edwards really throughout the game. They lost him a couple of times in transition. Ant got free coming around screens a couple of times in this game, but for the most part, they were pretty connected to Ant. And he was only 3 of 10 on 2-point shots in this game. Anthony Edwards was, because they were in his jersey for a lot of it. And outside of the 4 free throws he shot when the Warriors were playing the foul game late, Ant only shot 4 free throws in this game. So little sub point here. The officiating was poor. It's been a couple weeks since I've said that, right? I try to call him like I see him here. If you regularly listen to the show, I very rarely talk about officials. It was poor in this game. The Wolves only had 18 free throw attempts. Golden State had 26. And of the Wolves 18, 4 of them were, again, the foul game late, right? It was 26-14 in the free throw department. And you can't tell me that Golden State is the more aggressive team than Minnesota, right? You look at the shot chart, like, I mean, both teams shot a ton of threes in this game, but it's not like Golden State was shooting a bunch more in the paint. Each team had same amount of points in the paint. Ant should have gotten to the line at least 3 or 4 more times in this game. Probably Rudy a couple of times too. He ended up only shooting 3 free throws. So it was a poorly officiated game. But that's the sub point here. That's not the overall point I'm making. But the offense really was clunky for Minnesota. The ball movement improved. Ant had that big second quarter. He hit a couple big shots late, right after he came back in the game in the fourth, when the game was a 5-point game, I think at that point. He hit a 3 right after coming back in the game. That was big when Golden State was trying to build some momentum. So that was all positive for Minnesota down the stretch in this one. I want to talk. Well, actually, let's talk a little bit. No, wait. Let's get back to Ant and studs and duds, because I do have a couple more Ant things. Let's talk about some of the other box score stuff in this game. Transition for Minnesota. Now, we know Minnesota doesn't play fast, right? Pace-wise, they've been bottom 10 in the league. They were dead last for a little while earlier. They've started to play a little bit faster. I've done basically full shows on this topic here recently, and certainly some segments here and there about how the Wolves need to take advantage and do more in transition. And I'll give you the quick version here. Post-Cat injury is when you lose your best all-around, most efficient offensive player in Karl-Anthony Towns, and I'm not, Ant is the most talented, the most athletic, the most lots of stuff, but Cat is the most efficient offensive player in the Wolves. There's no question about that. When you lose him, you lose half of the guys who you're really calling plays for, right? One of the 2 guys. You need to do some stuff, right? You got to shoot more threes. You got to play faster. And for the most part, the Wolves are doing that. Now, of course, Cat's also their best 3-point shooter. So a bit of a weird, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm blanking on the word I want to use there, but it's a conundrum. That's not the word I wanted, but you know what I'm trying to say. You lose your best 3-point shooter, but yet you need to shoot more threes, right? But that's kind of what it is, right? You need to play a higher variance game. You need to play faster, because your half-court offense won't be as good without Karl-Anthony Towns. The Wolves have kind of done that, and heading into this game, I believe they're 4-3 without, since the Cat injury, starting with that Pacers win a couple of weeks ago, a little over 2 weeks ago. So yeah, they played a little faster. They've certainly shot more threes, and that's worked for the most part. Now, the Golden State does play at a faster pace than Minnesota for the season, but it's also a team you can run against, right? One of the things Golden State likes to do, and Jim Peterson talked about this actually on the Bally Sports North broadcast, Golden State's third in offensive rebounding. They like to crash the glass. They get open threes off of crashing from the corners, having their guys in the perimeter crash the glass, which leads to unbalanced floor opportunities. As Jim Pete noted on the broadcast, it gives the Wolves the opportunity to run in transition. The Wolves are dead last in the league in running after a defensive rebound, according to Cleaning the Glass. Opportunity was there in this game to do that, and they did it a little bit. They ended up +4 in fast break points, 17-13. I thought they should have and could have done it more, but it was good to see them do it a little. And I would just kind of underscore that point, right? Minnesota needs to continue to do that against teams that they can run against. It's not completely changing their offensive identity. It's just asking them to find opportunities for easy buckets without their most efficient offensive player, right? And those opportunities exist. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as the week goes on. And we'll look at some of the upcoming opponents and, hey, are these teams that the Wolves could take advantage of run against? Like now the Detroit game on Wednesday, the next opponent for Minnesota, again, more to come on this later. I don't know that it's worth it against a team like Detroit. Like, you should be able to score against their bottom 3 or 4 defense, right, in the half court. Detroit wants to play fast, because when you're bad and you're young, higher variance is a good thing, right? But if you're Minnesota, you're playing an opponent that's a similar standing as you, or a team that may be better than you, the shorthanded version of the Wolves. You want to create more possessions, more 3-pointers, more easy buckets in transition, pretty much, right? Despite being a really good defensive team. Against Detroit, don't bother. right? Just play your half court game, be solid. Now, when they play Denver on Friday in Denver, it's a little 1-game road trip at altitude, which is a challenge, certainly. Make it a higher variance game, right? Get out in transition, shoot more threes, all of the above on Friday against Denver. Not necessarily against Detroit. And again, it's not a completely different identity. It's just a little bit different, right? It's just doing things a little bit differently. Okay. A couple more points there and studs and duds. That's how we'll close the show here today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. It's demon time on Prize Picks right now. You can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You could turn $10 into $1,000. Demons and Goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. Plus, you can play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill or comedian Andrew Schultz. You can find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, one more point here before we get to studs and duds. The Wolves had this big size advantage with Rudy, and not like Nas is massive compared to some of Golden State's front line, but he's a big, and I've gotten on him in the past, not as much this year, but rebounding wise, I feel like in past years they've needed a little bit more out of him. He was great on the glass, especially early. Actually, I think he had 12 boards like in the third quarter, and I'm not sure he got one late at all. But overall, Nas was good on the glass. Rudy was good on the glass. The Wolves ended up being a +3 rebounding the basketball, and they only gave up 7 offensive rebounds to Golden State, which is a big part of what Golden State does. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think either team had any second chance points at halftime, which again is a big part of Golden State's offense. So credit to the Wolves for rebounding their positions. That was a really important part to this game. Kyle Anderson had 6 boards off the bench in 26 minutes. I should also point, I didn't talk much about this. Well, actually, no, I haven't had a show since Friday when the Wolves made the lineup adjustment against Cleveland on Friday with Nas in the starting lineup with Rudy. Both of them in the starting lineup after they both returned to action on Friday. Instead of bringing Nas off the bench, instead moving Kyle Anderson to the bench. That was awesome in this game too. I mean, Slow-Mo turned in a 10, 6, and 5 performance with a couple of steals and a block. It was a good Kyle Anderson performance. He's been effective he was good against Cleveland too. Moving him back into that bench kind of Swiss Army knife role instead of being like, hey, you're starting big. What did he have? Actually, he also had 10, 6, and 5 against Cleveland. He had 10 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists in each of the last 2 games against Cleveland on Friday and Golden State on Sunday. He also pitched in 3 steals Friday. He had 2 steals and a block. So, 3 stocks in each game too. Basically identical lines, and also no turnovers in either game. And he also didn't shoot any threes in this game either. He didn't. Golden State wasn't guarding him early, and I was worried about it, especially in the first quarter when the Wolves' ball movement was so stagnant. Slow-Mo was basically playing one on a half of a player because they were like half guarding him, and he still wasn't scoring. But as the game wore on, the ball movement improved for Minnesota, and they got enough from Nas and Ant at different moments, and then again from some of these other guys we talked about, Conley and Alexander-Walker and Monte Morris, that it ended up not being an issue for Minnesota. All right. So good in transition. They could have been better. Good on the glass. Could have been a little bit better. We talked about the free throw shooting and how the Wolves kind of got screwed over on the glass a little bit. Also, 3-point shooting. Minnesota was awesome. 21 of 40 outside the arc, 52.5%, giving Golden State a taste of their own medicine. Golden State was good, 39%. They made 14 threes. But the Wolves forced Klay Thompson into 3 of 11. They forced Steph Curry, 5-11's fine, but it's not otherworldly for Steph by Steph's standards. They did a pretty good job against both of them in this game. And the rest of the team hit a combined 6 threes. So the Wolves did pretty good overall against their shooters and against some of the movement. McDaniels got hit with a couple of Alexander Walker was in some early foul trouble in this game, but it was fine. Like it was mostly off-ball stuff, and that's partly where the Warriors got a lot of their free throws was in the penalty or in the bonus, I should say, with the Wolves being in the penalty with grabbing jerseys and knocking guys coming around screens. Clay, by the way, on that last Warriors offensive possession with an opportunity to tie it, not last possession, but like the last one before the foul game started, the Wolves switched the Warriors, I should say, ran a sideline out of bounds play. They ran a flare screen for Klay Thompson to get him to the left wing. And the Wolves switched it, and Kyle Anderson stayed on Klay Thompson's shooting side, knowing he was going to launch it. I think he should have gotten a little closer on the contest. Knowing Klay was going to shoot a three, he was trying to stay close to that side of him versus in front of him and open himself up. I think he thought he could get off a better contest because it's not like Klay was going to drive to the basket down three. It was an okay contest. Klay just missed it wide right. It was just a missed shot. I felt like the Wolves defense should have been a little bit tighter on that one, but it worked out. Anyway, all right. Studs and duds. Talked about Anthony Edwards. He is a stud. 23 points. He did shoot just 7 of 18, and I mentioned earlier he was just 3 of 10 on twos, but he was 4 of 8 on threes, 5 of 8 at the line, and knocked down 3 of 4 late when the Warriors were trying to play the foul game. So that worked out. 8 assists, 6 rebounds, and only 2 turnovers, and this is my other Ant point that I wanted to make that I mentioned earlier. Ant's passing was very good in this game. 8 points, 2 turnovers. I think both of his turnovers were in the first quarter when the Wolves were just like allergic to not turning the ball over, and they committed 9 in the first frame. Ant had one pass in particular that was awesome. Golden State had 3 guys on him, basically like free throw line extended right side of the floor. And instead of the easy pass to the next guy up top and swing the ball around the perimeter, allow Golden State to recover, scramble and recover to their own guys, he threw a skip pass to the opposite corner of Jaden McDaniels, who knocked down the 3. And we've seen Ant do that before, and it's not like this otherworldly basketball play, but it's another example of the growth that Ant continues to show and just how dangerous the Wolves are if Ant makes the right read. And, these are multiple ifs, but like you got to have this stuff happen if you're going to win a title, right? Or if you're going to get to the finals or get to the conference finals for that matter, especially with no Karl-Anthony Towns. McDaniels has to shoot 39, 40% like he did last year from 3. Alexander-Walker has to shoot more like he did early this season than he has here recently. Monte Morris has to shoot like he did in it's not the absolute best case for all these guys, but they have to shoot reasonably around their career averages from deep. And they did in this game. Ant was 4 of 8 from 3. Conley was 3 of 7. Reid was 6 of 8, made his first 5 from deep. McDaniels 2 of 6. Like, that'll play. I mean, it's not great. That's 33%, right? You needed to be closer to 40, but it's better than when he missed 20 in a row over the last week and a half. Not, I guess, going back a week, the week and a half before that, but he was going like 0 of 5 every night. It's better than 1 of 6, right? Like 2 of 6 from Jaden will play if you get 6 of 8 from Nas, or 4 of 8 from Ant, or 3 of 7 from Conley, and 3 of 5 from Alexander-Walker, 2 of 4 from Monte Morris. You're not going to shoot 50% from 3-point line every night. But we know that this is still a good 3-point shooting basketball team. They have been all season, and they were first in the league not that long ago. They were 4th coming into this game, and that may go up. I mean, you shoot over 40% on volume like that. What were they? 20, I think they were 21 of 40. That volume and that percentage, you might move up. But as a team, they're a really good 3-point shooting team, and those guys around Ant spreading the floor make a huge difference. And when they knock down threes anywhere close to this clip, it's a huge deal for Minnesota's offense. All right, other studs. Mike Conley was awesome. 14 points, 7 assists, 4 steals. I mentioned his play in the fourth quarter. He really came through. And this is kind of like, realistically, like, it's nice when you get a 20-point game from Mike. And, they've gotten some here recently. Well, not that long ago. Oh, yeah, Friday against Cleveland, he had 21. He had 25 against Utah a week and a half ago, 10 days ago. You're not going to get that all the time. Like, we're not going to get 2019 Mike Conley. We're just not. But if you get 14 and 7 and, 4 steals from Conley, like, yes, please. Like, that's what you need, especially sans Karl-Anthony Towns, to support Nas and to support Rudy and to support Ant. 14 and 7 and pitching in 4 steals and only 2 turnovers is awesome for Conley. My third stud in this one's Nas Reid, 20 and 12. I know he turned it over 6 times, but his offense was all that kept the Wolves afloat in the first quarter. What did he have? 10 of their 18 or 12 of their 18 in the first quarter, something like that. It was only Nas. keeping this team afloat early. He ended up only playing 29 minutes because Kyle Anderson was so good. But Nas was great. 20 and 12, 2 blocks and a steal, 7 of 11 shooting, 6 of 8 from 3. He kept the Wolves going early. Honorable mentions, I talked about Monte Morris in the first segment. Kyle Anderson was good. Nickeil Alexander-Walker was good. There's no duds in this game. I mean, Jaden didn't have a great game offensively or stat line wise. He did hit that big tough too late when they were up, I think just one. I don't want to say it's an ill-advised shot because they weren't going to get a shot off otherwise. It was like end of the shot clock and Jaden shot a tough, like contested 14-footer and he made it. The confidence for Jaden's the biggest thing. And he's had that here recently, the last couple of games. So no duds for me. I feel like I've had a lot of these no dud games this year, which is great, but everybody played well. All right. This was a fun one. It was a really fun game. I got a lot more to come here. Tuesday, we'll do some more bigger picture stuff. We'll take a half step back. The Wolves again have 2 consecutive days off, which is great. And then they host they host Detroit on Wednesday. So Wednesday we'll preview that matchup. We've only seen the Pistons once this year. So we'll kind of look at what they've been up to, what the keys to the game for Minnesota. And then the Wolves go to Denver on Friday. So a big week ahead. Lots to get to on the show here the next several days. Make sure you're following and subscribe to Locked On Wolves wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Of course, you can watch on YouTube. You can also listen wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, 2... I know how to spell my name. 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. And also at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T. You can also follow the postcast or watch the postcast on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube and also the Locked On Wolves podcast feed. We go live after each and every Wolves game. Get rapid reaction to all the biggest moments with the Locked On Wolves postcast. That's all we have for you today. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. A reminder that, of course, we've launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.